All right, so you want to understand what all this buzz around BRICS is about?
Yeah.
It's not just about cool acronyms.
Right.
This coalition of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has been making some serious waves lately.
Yeah.
Especially with their goal of kind of shifting the global power balance away from the U.S. dollar.
Right.
And it's not just talk, they're taking action.
Yeah.
They've even expanded their ranks,
Yeah.
welcoming new members like Iran, UAE, Ethiopia, and Egypt.
Wow.
I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right?
It is.
But the real question is, can they actually pull this off?
That's the question.
Can they truly challenge the established world order?
You've hit on the core issue.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see how BRICS has transformed
Yeah.
from a purely economic concept
Right.
to a potential geopolitical force.
Yeah.
Remember back in 2001
Oh, yeah.
when Goldman Sachs economist Jim O'Neill coined the term BRIC?
Yeah.
It was all about these emerging economies and their potential to kind of reshape global markets.
Yeah.
It was the investment story of the decade.
Yeah, the rising giants narrative.
Right?
But then things started to get a lot more interesting
Yeah.
when South Africa joined in 2010.
Exactly.
It felt like BRICS was ready to move beyond just economics and step onto the world stage,
Yeah.
challenging the West's dominance.
Exactly. Adding South Africa signaled a shift toward the more political agenda.
Yeah.
But let's be honest.
Yeah.
There were some growing pains along the way.
Oh, yeah.
Internal disagreements,
Right.
uneven growth among members.
Mm-hmm.
China's economic boom contrasted sharply with the struggles of Brazil and South Africa.
Yeah.
For a while, it seemed like BRICS was all talk and no action.
So what changed?
Right.
Why is everyone suddenly talking about BRICS as a serious contender?
Well, the recent summit in Kazan, Russia, was a major turning point.
Right.
The expanded BRICS coalition issued this bold 32-page document, the Kazan Declaration, outlining their vision for a multipolar world order.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the core members.
Yeah.
36 countries were present, showing a growing interest in aligning with BRICS objectives.
Okay, so they're not messing around.
No, they're not.
And one of their main strategies is this whole de-dollarization thing.
Right.
Now, I know it's about reducing reliance on the U.S. dollar, but how are they actually planning to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, the dollar has been the king for so long, it's hard to imagine anything replacing it.
It's true, dethroning the dollar is a monumental task.
Yeah.
But BRICS is implementing a multi-pronged strategy. One aspect is creating alternative financial systems.
Okay.
They're proposing a BRICS-specific payment messaging system
Okay.
to facilitate smoother trade and bypass the Western-controlled SWIFT network.
Right.
Remember how Russia was cut off from SWIFT after the conflict in Ukraine?
Yeah. Yeah.
This new system would essentially protect them from similar vulnerabilities in the future.
So they're building their own financial playground with their own rules.
Right.
That's pretty audacious. But what about actually trading?
Yeah.
Are we talking about a world where everyone's using yuan or rubles?
Well, they're exploring different approaches.
Okay.
One that has caught people's attention is the resurgence of bartering.
Bartering.
I know it sounds like we're going back to the Stone Age,
Yeah.
trading chickens for wheat,
Right.
but it's actually a clever way to circumvent the dollar altogether.
Okay.
BRICS nations are rich in natural resources. Think Russian gas and metals, Chinese rare earth elements,
Yeah.
Brazilian agricultural products.
Right.
By bartering, they can directly exchange these commodities without needing dollars as an intermediary.
That's a fascinating point.
Yeah.
I mean, I get the strategic advantage,
Right.
especially given the current geopolitical climate.
Uh-huh.
But let's be real.
Yeah.
Bartering on a global scale seems incredibly complex.
It would be.
How do you even begin to coordinate those exchanges?
Yeah.
You can't just swap a tanker of oil for a mountain of coffee beans.
You're right. Traditional bartering would be incredibly cumbersome,
Yeah.
especially for large-scale transactions.
Right.
That's where technology comes in.
Okay.
BRICS is exploring digital platforms to facilitate these exchanges, ensuring transparency, efficiency, and accountability.
Okay.
Think of it as bartering 2.0,
Bartering 2.0.
leveraging the power of the digital age to streamline this ancient practice.
Okay, bartering 2.0. I like it. It's
Yeah.
like they're taking something old and giving it a modern twist.
Right.
But bartering and alternative payment systems are just one piece of the puzzle. What about this whole idea of a new gold-backed currency?
Right.
The unit.
Yeah.
It sounds like something straight out of a history book.
It does have a certain historical ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there's a strategic logic behind this idea,
Okay.
with growing concerns about the long-term stability of fiat currencies.
Particularly the U.S. dollar. Gold is experiencing a resurgence as a safe haven asset.
Yeah, gold's like that old reliable friend you can always count on,
Right.
even when things get crazy.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And BRICS nations have been aggressively stockpiling gold reserves.
Yeah.
It's like they're preparing for a potential shift away from the dollar, hedging their bets, so to speak.
So they're basically saying, in gold we trust.
Kind of? Yeah.
It's a bold move.
It is.
But how would this unit even work?
That's the question.
Would it be like a BRICS-only currency? Or would they try to get other countries on board?
That's where things get really interesting.
They
We haven't released specific details yet.
Right.
But the idea is to create a currency backed by gold that could potentially challenge the dollar's dominance.
Right.
Whether it would be limited to BRICS nations or have a wider reach remains to be seen.
I can only imagine the debates and negotiations happening behind closed doors.
I know, right? It's like watching a high-stakes poker game unfold on a global scale.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And we're just at the beginning of this game.
Right.
It's too early to predict the outcome.
Uh-huh.
But one thing's for sure, the stakes are incredibly high.
All right, so we've got bartering 2.0,
Yeah.
a potential new gold-backed currency, and their own payment system. It sounds like they're building an entirely new economic ecosystem.
They are.
But what about the new development bank,
Right.
the NDB?
Yeah.
Where does that fit into all of this?
The NDB is a crucial part of their strategy.
Okay.
Think of it as their alternative to the World Bank and the IMF.
Right.
Institutions that are often perceived as having a Western bias.
Yeah, you always hear about the IMF imposing strict conditions on their loans, which can sometimes be controversial.
Exactly. The NDB is trying to offer a more equitable approach.
Okay.
And they're not just providing loans.
Yeah.
They're actively promoting the use of local currencies, further chipping away at the dollar's dominance.
Right.
Their goal is to have 30% of their loans issued in non-dollar currencies.
Right. That's a pretty ambitious target.
It is.
Are we seeing any real-world examples of this shift away from the dollar?
There are reports that Saudi Arabia,
Okay.
a key player in the oil market,
Right.
is considering accepting yuan for oil transactions.
Wow.
If that happens, it would be a major blow to the petrodollar system
Yeah.
and a sign that the global financial landscape is truly shifting.
Okay. I need a moment to process all of this.
Yeah.
BRICS is challenging the dollar's dominance on multiple fronts.
Mm-hmm.
They're creating their own financial infrastructure,
Right.
exploring new trade mechanisms,
Yeah.
and even potentially launching a rival currency.
Yeah,
It's a bold and complex strategy, to say the least.
it is.
But let's face it, the
Yep.
U.S. dollar has been the reigning champion for a long time.
It has.
It's not going down without a fight, right?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The dollar's dominance is deeply entrenched in the global financial system.
Yeah.
It's the most widely accepted currency. It dominates oil markets.
Right.
The majority of foreign reserves are held in dollars.
Yeah.
And the U.S. financial markets are incredibly deep and liquid.
Right.
Toppling the dollar is a monumental challenge.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that BRICS will succeed.
So what are the biggest hurdles they're facing?
Yeah.
Aside from the sheer power of the U.S. dollar, I mean...
One significant challenge is internal cohesion within BRICS.
Okay.
Despite their shared goals, there are tensions and rivalries among members,
Right.
especially between India and China,
Yeah.
the two largest economies in the bloc. If they can't overcome these internal divisions
Yeah.
and present a united front, it will be difficult for them to achieve their ambitious objectives.
It's that classic problem of herding cats.
Right.
Getting everyone on the same page and working towards a common goal is never easy.
It's not
Especially when you have strong personalities and competing interests at play.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's another factor to consider.
Okay.
The potential for unintended consequences.
Oh, yeah.
De-dollarization, even if successful,
Yeah.
could have ripple effects throughout the global economy.
Right.
It could lead to increased inflation, disruptions in supply chains,
Right.
and a reevaluation of global alliances.
Yeah.
These are complex issues with no easy answers.
It sounds like we're on the verge of a major power shift.
It does.
But the path forward is anything but clear.
Yeah.
There are so many variables,
Yeah.
so many potential outcomes, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
It's like watching a slow-motion earthquake unfold.
Right.
Knowing that the landscape is about to be drastically altered, but not knowing exactly how.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
And it captures the uncertainty and anxiety that many people are feeling right now. We're entering uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And the implications are far-reaching.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the key takeaways for our listener who's trying to make sense of all this?
I think the most important takeaway is that we're witnessing a historic transition.
Okay.
The global power balance is shifting.
Yeah.
And the outcome is uncertain.
Right.
The dominance of the U.S. dollar is being challenged in a way we haven't seen in decades.
Right. And it's not just about economics and finance. It's about geopolitics, resource control, and the future of global alliances. It's about who holds the power and how that power is exercised.
Exactly. It's about the very structure of the world order as we know it.
Okay. I need a deep breath after all that.
Yeah, me too.
I feel like we've just taken a crash course in global power dynamics.
We have.
But before we get too overwhelmed,
Yeah.
let's take a closer look at some of the potential consequences of this BRICS-led movement.
Okay.
What are the real-world impacts that people might experience, both in the short term and the long term?
That's a great question, and it's where things get really interesting.
Right.
For people in Western countries, especially those heavily reliant on the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
The most immediate impact might be felt through inflation.
Okay.
If BRICS nations start demanding higher prices for their resources and goods, and trade moves away from the dollar,
right,
it could lead to rising costs for imports, which would trickle down to consumers.
So that new phone or that cup of coffee might get more expensive.
Potentially. And it's not just about individual products.
Right.
It could affect entire industries and supply chains.
Okay.
Imagine if manufacturers have to source materials from different countries, or if transportation costs increase due to shifts in trade routes.
Right.
These disruptions can have ripple effects throughout the economy.
So it's not just about some abstract geopolitical game.
Right.
It could hit people right in their wallet.
Absolutely. And there are geopolitical implications as well.
Okay.
Countries might reevaluate their alliances. We could see nations moving closer to BRICS.
Yeah.
Seeking better trade deals or access to resources.
It's like the whole global chessboard is being rearranged.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that this is a long game. These changes won't happen overnight.
Right.
It's a gradual shift in the balance of power.
Okay, so we've got inflation,
Yeah.
potential supply chain issues, and a reshuffling of global alliances.
Right.
And we haven't even touched on the potential for resource nationalism.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a whole other can of worms.
We'll definitely delve into that in more detail.
Yeah.
But first, I want to go back to this idea of a gold-backed unit.
Okay.
It's captured the imagination of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it raises some fascinating questions.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. What would it actually mean for the world if BRICS managed to create a viable alternative to the dollar?
Right.
Backed by gold, no less.
It's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
If the unit gains traction, it could trigger a domino effect.
Okay.
Other countries.
Yeah.
Especially those seeking to reduce their dependence on the U.S.
Right.
Might be tempted to join the BRICS sphere of influence. Imagine a world where multiple currency blocks compete for dominance.
Whoa, multiple currency blocks.
Yeah.
It's like we're talking about a whole new economic world order.
It's a possibility, and it would have profound implications.
Yeah.
The way we trade, invest, and even think about money could be transformed.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around, but before we dive deeper into that rabbit hole,
Okay.
let's take a quick break.
So good.
We'll be right back to explore the potential for resource nationalism and what it could mean for the global balance of power. All right, we're back and ready to unpack this idea of resource nationalism.
Okay.
I'm already sensing this could be a game changer.
It definitely has the potential to reshape the global landscape.
Yeah.
Essentially, resource nationalism is when countries with abundant natural resources decide to exert greater control over those resources.
Yeah.
Often for strategic or political gain.
So it's like they're saying, hey, these are our treasures, and we're not just going to give them away anymore.
Exactly. And remember, BRICS nations are sitting on a treasure trove of oil, gas, minerals, rare earth elements, you name it.
Right.
They have the ingredients for a powerful hand, in this global game.
Right. And we've already touched on how they're using bartering and creating alternative financial systems to bypass the dollar and gain more leverage in trade.
Exactly. So imagine a scenario where BRICS countries decide to prioritize their own domestic needs.
Okay.
Or to use their resources as bargaining chips in geopolitical negotiations.
So instead of freely selling their resources on the global market, they might start playing hardball.
Precisely, they could restrict exports, set higher prices, or even form exclusive partnerships with select countries, leaving others scrambling for alternatives.
Wow, that would create a whole new set of challenges.
I would.
For countries that rely on those resources. We could see shortages, price spikes, and even political instability.
Those are very real possibilities.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, but also increasingly competitive.
Yeah.
When it comes to securing essential resources.
It's like a high-stakes game of Monopoly.
Right.
Where everyone's vying for control of the most valuable properties.
That's a great analogy. And in this game, resources are the properties.
Yeah.
And BRICS is strategically positioning itself to be a major player.
So how might this resource nationalism play out in specific scenarios?
Right.
Let's say, for example, a country heavily reliant on oil imports suddenly finds itself on the wrong side of a BRICS trade deal.
Right.
What happens then?
Well, in that scenario, they might be forced to pay a premium for that oil.
Okay.
Or they might even have their supply cut off altogether.
Wow.
This could lead to energy shortages, economic disruption, and potentially even social unrest.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And it makes you realize that the global balance of power isn't just about military might or political alliances anymore.
Right.
It's about who controls the resources that fuel the modern world.
Absolutely. And BRICS is signaling that they intend to be a major force in that new world order.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the potential implications of BRICS' rise for the average person.
Yeah.
I mean, beyond potentially paying more for gas or that cup of coffee.
Right.
How could these global shifts impact their daily lives?
It's a crucial question, and the answer is in many ways both subtle and profound.
Okay.
As we've discussed, de-dollarization could lead to inflation as import costs rise. But beyond that, there could be shifts in global supply chains.
Yeah.
Leading to changes in the availability and pricing of various goods.
So that new gadget you've been eyeing might become harder to find or more expensive.
That's a possibility, and it's not just about consumer goods.
Okay.
Think about pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Medical equipment.
Yeah.
Even food supplies.
Wow.
As trade patterns shift and new alliances emerge, these essential goods could be affected.
It's a reminder that we live in a globalized world.
We do.
And these seemingly distant geopolitical events can have very real consequences close to home.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of understanding these trends and adapting to a changing world order.
All right, let's get back to this potential gold-backed currency.
Okay.
The unit. I'm still fascinated by the idea.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious about the potential challenges. I mean, launching a new global currency is a massive undertaking.
It is.
Even for a powerful bloc like BRICS.
You're right. It's a monumental task.
Yeah.
And there are many obstacles they would have to overcome, first and foremost. They would need to establish trust and credibility.
Right.
The world needs to believe that this new currency is stable, reliable, and backed by sufficient gold reserves.
It's like building a new brand.
Right.
But on a global scale.
Right. You need a compelling story.
Yeah.
A strong reputation. And a lot of marketing muscle to convince people to buy in.
Exactly. And they would need to create a robust infrastructure to support this new currency, including exchanges, payment systems, and regulatory frameworks.
It's not just about printing fancy banknotes. It's about building an entire ecosystem to support a new global currency.
Precisely. And they would need to navigate the complex political landscape.
Yeah.
The U.S. dollar's dominance isn't just about economics.
Right.
It's about geopolitics and the influence that comes with controlling the world's reserve currency.
Right. The U.S. won't just hand over the crown willingly.
No.
They'll fight to maintain their position.
Yeah.
And that could lead to some serious economic and political friction.
It's a possibility we have to consider.
Yeah.
And it's one of the many uncertainties surrounding the future of this BRICS-led movement.
So even if BRICS manages to overcome these challenges and successfully launches the unit,
Right.
What would it actually mean for the average person?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What would a world with multiple currency blocks look like?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it's one that economists and political analysts are grappling with right now.
Right.
One possibility is that we would see a more fragmented global economy, with different regions trading primarily within their own currency blocks. This could lead to more regional specialization, with countries focusing on producing goods and services that are in high demand within their bloc.
So instead of a single interconnected global marketplace, we might see multiple smaller marketplaces, each with its own currency and trading patterns.
Exactly. And this could have implications for consumers. The range of products available might change. And prices might fluctuate as exchange rates between different currencies vary.
It's like going from a massive supermarket with endless choices to a series of smaller specialized shops. That's a great way to visualize it, and it highlights the potential for both benefits and drawbacks. On the one hand, regional specialization could lead to greater efficiency and lower prices within each block. On the other hand, it could limit consumer choice and make it more difficult to access goods and services from other parts of the world.
It's a trade-off. More focus, potentially lower prices, but also less variety and potentially higher prices for goods from outside your block?
Exactly, and it's one of the many factors to consider as we navigate this shifting global landscape.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential for a more fragmented global economy. But what about the broader implications for geopolitics and global stability? Could the rise of multiple currency blocks lead to greater competition and even conflict between nations?
That's a concern that many experts have raised. If countries are primarily trading within their own blocks, using their own currencies, it could reduce their economic interdependence and make them less reliant on each other. This could in turn lead to greater nationalistic sentiment and a more competitive, even adversarial international environment.
It's like each bloc retreating into its own fortress, focused on its own interests and less willing to cooperate with others.
That's a stark image. But it captures the potential risks involved. Of course, it's not inevitable that things would play out this way. There's always the possibility that countries could find ways to cooperate and collaborate across currency blocks, fostering greater economic and political stability.
So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game.
No.
There's still room for diplomacy and cooperation, even in a more multipolar world.
Absolutely. It all comes down to the choices that countries make and the strategies they pursue. And that's what makes this moment in history so crucial. We're at a crossroads, and the decisions made now will shape the world for generations to come.
All right. I'm sensing a need to ground ourselves a bit after all that high-level analysis. Let's bring it back to something tangible. What's a concrete example of how this BRICS-led movement is already playing out in the real world?
Well, take the case of Saudi Arabia, a longtime ally of the U.S., and a cornerstone of the petrodollar system. As we mentioned earlier, there are reports that they're considering accepting yuan for oil transactions.
Wow.
This is a significant development. Because it suggests that even traditional U.S. allies are starting to explore alternatives to the dollar.
It's like cracks are starting to appear in the foundation of the dollar's dominance. And it seems like BRICS is strategically exploiting those cracks.
That's a good way to put it. They're seizing opportunities to chip away at the dollar's hegemony and to build their own sphere of influence. And they're doing it on multiple fronts, through trade finance and even diplomacy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about resource nationalism, potential for a more fragmented global economy, and the challenges and implications of launching a new gold-backed currency. It's a lot to process.
It is.
Even for someone who's been following these trends closely.
It is a lot to take in. And it's important to remember that this is a dynamic and evolving situation. What we're seeing now is just the beginning of a long and complex process of transformation.
So how should our listener approach this information? I mean, it's easy to feel overwhelmed or even anxious when you start thinking about all the potential consequences.
It's natural to feel some unease in the face of such profound change. But I think the key is to stay informed.
Okay.
To be aware of the trends and the forces at play.
Right.
And to approach the future with a sense of curiosity and adaptability.
So instead of fearing the unknown, embrace it as an opportunity to learn and to evolve along with the world.
Exactly. This is a time of great transformation.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to rethink our assumptions, to challenge the status quo, and to explore new possibilities.
Well said.
Thank you.
And on that note, let's move on to our final thought for our listener.
Okay.
I want to go back to this idea of a multipolar world order.
Yeah.
A world where power is more evenly distributed among different nations and blocs.
Right.
Is this a positive development, or should we be wary of it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
A multipolar world could bring greater balance and stability,
Okay.
reducing the risk of any single nation or bloc dominating the global landscape.
Right.
Could also lead to greater diversity and innovation as different regions develop their own unique approaches to economics, politics, and culture.
So there's potential for both progress and instability.
Exactly. It all depends on how countries choose to navigate this new reality, if they embrace cooperation, dialogue, and mutual respect.
Yeah.
A multipolar world could usher in an era of greater peace and prosperity.
Okay.
But if they succumb to rivalry, protectionism, and zero-sum thinking, it could lead to conflict and instability.
It's a stark choice.
It is.
And it highlights the responsibility that we all have, both as individuals and as nations, to shape the future we want to see.
I couldn't agree more. The future is not preordained.
Right.
It's something we create through our choices and our actions.
Well, you've given our listener a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
And I think we've just scratched the surface of this complex and fascinating topic.
We have.
But before we wrap up, I want to delve a little deeper into the potential for resource nationalism.
Okay.
And explore some specific examples of how it might play out in the years to come. All right, let's dive into some real-world examples of resource nationalism.
Okay.
I'm particularly interested in how this plays out with critical resources like rare earth elements.
Right.
China currently dominates that market, right?
Absolutely do.
Yeah.
China controls a significant portion of the global production and processing of rare earth elements.
Right.
Which are essential for all sorts of modern technologies.
Yeah.
From smartphones and electric vehicles to defense systems and renewable energy.
So if China decides to flex its muscles and restrict exports of these elements, it could have a major impact on global supply chains.
It would.
And technological innovation.
Precisely. It would be like cutting off the oxygen supply to various industries.
Wow.
And it's not just a hypothetical scenario.
Right.
China has used its dominance in rare earth elements as a strategic lever in the past.
Can you give us an example?
Back in 2010,
during
a territorial dispute with Japan, China temporarily halted exports of rare earth elements.
Oh, wow.
Sending shockwaves through global markets.
Yeah.
It was a demonstration of their power and a warning shot to other countries.
That's a pretty stark example
of
how resource nationalism can play out. It's like a high-stakes game of economic chess.
It is, and it highlights the vulnerabilities of countries that rely heavily on a single supplier for critical resources.
So what can countries do to mitigate these risks?
Right.
I mean, short of finding a magical new source of rare earth elements, is there any way to reduce their dependence on China?
Well, there are a few strategies they can pursue.
Okay.
One is to diversify their supply chains.
Okay.
Sourcing these elements from multiple countries.
Right.
Even if it means paying a slightly higher price.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Spread the risk around.
Another strategy is to invest in domestic production or processing of these elements. Even if it's not economically viable in the short term, it's about long-term strategic resilience.
It's like having a backup generator in case the power goes out.
Right.
It might seem expensive.
Yeah.
But it's worth it when you really need it.
Precisely. And there's a third strategy, which is to invest in research and development, to find substitutes for rare earth elements, or to develop more efficient ways to use them.
So it's about innovation and finding ways to reduce dependence on these critical materials altogether.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a combination of diversification, domestic investment, and technological innovation.
Okay, that makes sense, but it sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
And a lot of investment.
But the stakes are high.
Right.
In a world where access to resources is increasingly contested, countries need to be proactive and strategic.
So it's not just about reacting to events as they happen. It's about anticipating potential challenges and preparing for them.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole discussion about BRICS and a multipolar world order becomes so relevant.
Yeah.
As the balance of power shifts, countries need to reevaluate their strategies and their alliances.
Okay, so we've talked about rare earth elements, but let's broaden the lens a bit. What are some other key resources that could become flashpoints for resource nationalism in the future?
Well, energy resources, particularly oil and natural gas, are always going to be a major factor in geopolitics.
Yeah.
We've already seen how Russia's control over natural gas pipelines has given them leverage over European countries.
Right. It's like having your hand on the valve that controls the flow of energy. That's a lot of power.
It is.
Yeah.
And as the world transitions to renewable energy, access to the materials needed for solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries will become increasingly important.
So we're talking about things like lithium,
Right.
cobalt, copper, nickel.
Exactly. These are the building blocks of the clean energy future.
Yeah.
And they could become the next battleground for resource nationalism.
It's like the geopolitical chessboard is being reset with new pieces and new rules.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to remember that these resource struggles are not just about economics. It's about power influence and national security.
So it's not just about who gets the cheapest deal on lithium.
Right.
It's about who controls the supply chains that fuel the global economy.
Exactly.
And who has the leverage to shape the future.
Precisely. And that's why this topic is so crucial to understand.
Yeah.
We're living through a historic transition, and the decisions made now will have far-reaching consequences.
Well, you've certainly given our listener a lot to ponder today.
I hope so.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of this complex and evolving landscape.
We have covered a lot of ground, but it's just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
The key takeaway is that the world is changing.
Yeah.
And we need to be prepared to adapt.
Right. It's about staying informed, thinking strategically, and embracing the challenges and opportunities of a multipolar world.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that the future is not something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create through our choices and our actions.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of BRICS, resource nationalism, and the shifting global power balance. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
I hope so.
And to our listener, we encourage you to continue exploring these topics and to engage in the ongoing conversation about the future we want to build.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.